Midnight Express. It was a battered old book, bound in red buckram. He found it when he was 12 years old on an upper shelf in his father's library, and, against all the rules, he took it to his bedroom to read by candlelight, when the rest of the rambling old Elizabethan house was flooded with darkness. That was how young Mortimer always thought of it. His own room was a little isolated cell in which, with stolen candle ends, he could keep the surrounding darkness at bay, while everyone else had surrendered to sleep and allowed the outer night to come flooding in. By contrast with those unconscious ones, his elders, it made him feel intensely alive in every nerve and fiber of his young brain. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall below, the beating of his own heart, the long-drawn rhythmical ah of the sea on the distant coast, all filled him with a sense of overwhelming mystery. And as he read, the soft thud of a blinded moth striking the wall above the candle would make him start and listen like a creature of the woods at the sound of a cracking twig. The battered old book had the strangest fascination for him, though he never quite grasped the thread of the story. It was called The Midnight Express, and there was one illustration on the 50th page at which he could never bear to look. It frightened him. Young Mortimer never understood the effect of that picture on him. He was an imaginative but not a neurotic youngster, and he avoided that 50th page as he might have hurried past a dark corner on the stairs when he was 6 years old, or as the grown man in the lonely road in The Ancient Mariner who, having once looked round, walks on, and turns no more his head. There was nothing in the picture, apparently, to account for this haunting dread. Darkness, indeed, was almost its chief characteristic. It showed an empty railway platform at night, lit by a single dreary lamp, an empty railway platform that suggested a deserted and lonely junction in some remote part of the country. There was only one figure on the platform, the dark figure of a man, standing almost directly under the lamp, with his face turned away toward the black mouth of a tunnel, which, for some strange reason, plunged the imagination of the child into a pit of horror. The man seemed to be listening. His attitude was tense, expectant, as though he were awaiting some fearful tragedy. There was nothing in the text, so far as the child read and could understand, to account for this waking nightmare. He could neither resist the fascination of the book, nor face that picture in the stillness and loneliness of the night. He pinned it down to the page facing it, with 2 long pins, so that he should not come upon it by accident. Then he determined to read the whole story through, but always, before he came to page 50, he fell asleep, and the outlines of what he had read were blurred, and the next night he had to begin again, and again, before he came to the 50th page, he fell asleep. He grew up and forgot all about the book and the picture, but halfway through his life, at that strange and critical time when Dante entered the dark wood, leaving the direct path behind him, he found himself, a little before midnight, waiting for a train at a lonely junction, and as the station clock began to strike 12, he remembered like a man awaking from a long dream. There, under the single dreary lamp on the long, glimmering platform, was the dark and solitary figure that he knew. Its face was turned away from him toward the black mouth of the tunnel. It seemed to be listening, tense, expectant, just as it had been 38 years ago. But he was not frightened now, as he had been in childhood. He would go up to that solitary figure, confront it, and see the face that had so long been hidden, so long averted from him. He would walk up quietly and make some excuse for speaking to it. He would ask it, for instance, if the train was going to be late. It should be easy for a grown man to do this, but his hands were clenched when he took the first step, as if he, too, were tense and expectant. Quietly, but with the old vague instincts awaking, He went toward the dark figure under the lamp, past it, swung round abruptly to speak to it, and saw, without speaking, without being able to speak, it was himself, staring back at himself, as if in some mocking mirror, his own eyes, alive in his own white face, looking into his own eyes, alive. The nerves of his heart tingled as though their own electric currents would paralyze it. A wave of panic went through him. He turned, gasped, stumbled, broke into a blind run, out through the deserted and echoing ticket office, onto the long moonlit road behind the station. The whole countryside seemed to be utterly deserted. The moonbeams flooded it with the loneliness of their own deserted satellite. He paused for a moment, and heard, like the echo of his own footsteps, the stumbling run of something that followed over the wooden floor within the ticket office. Then he abandoned himself shamelessly to his fear and ran, sweating like a terrified beast, down the long white road between two endless lines of ghostly poplars, each answering another, into what seemed an infinite distance. On one side of the road there was a long, straight canal, in which one of the lines of poplars was again endlessly reflected. He heard the footsteps echoing behind him. They seemed to be slowly but steadily gaining upon him. A quarter of a mile away he saw a small white cottage by the roadside, a white cottage with 2 dark windows and a door that somehow suggested a human face. He thought to himself that, if he could reach it in time, he might find shelter and security, escape.